Okay. So we in the Climate Forum have set ourselves a huge task to urgently reduce greenhouse gas emissions in this region, consistent with a less than 1.5 degree temperature rise. We need to know something about the nature of our task. This brief presentation aims to introduce that, and we apologise if some of the information is well known to some of you. We hope there's material to interest everyone. So, next slide, please. And thank you. Here's the Earth and its atmosphere. Very thin, very delicate, a blanket that previously kept the Earth warm in the range of temperatures in which all life thrives. On the Moon, close by but with no atmosphere, temperatures can range from 121 degrees Celsius in the sun to minus 157 in the shade. The Earth's atmosphere is composed of many different gases. The sun's rays hit the Earth and are reflected back to space. The gases we're interested in are those that act like the glass in a greenhouse, reflecting the escaping heat back down again and warming the Earth. Not too cold, not too hot, but just right, up until recently. Next, please. These are the greenhouse gases, and I'm focusing on the gases in red: carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and the refrigerants. These are the ones we've increased by human activities, as shown. This has made the delicately balanced atmospheric blanket too thick and the Earth too hot. We've disturbed the balance, a failure of kaitiakitanga, a big mistake. Next, please. Now, are these gases equally potent in their global warming action? And do they remain in the atmosphere for the same length of time? No, they differ greatly on both counts. In the left-hand column are the gases. The middle column is the global warming potential, which is a measure of how much heat a greenhouse gas traps in the atmosphere relative to carbon dioxide. You can see that methane takes on average 12 years. Whoops. Oh, yes, sorry. It's like a little glitch there. The column on the right is the half-life of the gases, which is how long it takes to reduce their mass to half in the atmosphere. You can see that methane takes on average 12 years, nitrous oxide over 100 years, and carbon dioxide, once it's up there, it's pretty much there to stay. So with the global warming potential, the middle column, methane is 25 times as powerful and nitrous oxide 300 times. Refrigerants are really bad. So calculations are done to express each gas's global warming potential relative to carbon dioxide, and we call that the carbon dioxide equivalent. It's written as CO2e. So when we say that New Zealand emits 79 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent each year, that's a mix of all those gases with the same global warming potential as 79 million tonnes of actual carbon dioxide. Next, please. This chart is central to this presentation. I have it stuck on the wall of my study so I can refer to it. So if New Zealand emits 79 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent each year, where is it coming from? This chart shows us. We're hoping that we soon get a regional breakdown of emission sources to help us focus our climate forum work. But here is the whole of New Zealand. And starting with the inner circle, the blue right-hand half, you can see is from agriculture, mainly livestock, and mostly it's methane and nitrous oxide. And this part falls into the domains in our forum of our land use group and our food and fibre group. Moving to the left, waste is mainly methane, and it concerns our resources and waste group. Industrial processes have to do with making iron, steel, aluminium, cement, refrigeration, and air conditioning. And that's mainly carbon dioxide and refrigerant gases. Moving further on, the fugitive emissions are from natural gas, mainly methane, at every step of its use, from gas well to the gas hob in my house. There are leaks all along the way. Electricity, 4.4%. Other includes home heating. And then on to manufacturing, which is largely food processing, like drying milk with coal and pulp and paper manufacture, and that concerns the business group. Construction, our urban development group, and then onto the other big one, transport, including aviation, but especially road transport, and that concerns our transport group. So we've clearly got a huge task to get the Nelson Tasman share of 79 million tonnes a year down to 0 by 2050. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, says we should be doing this at the rate of 7.6% lower emissions each year, which is a lot, and it needs to involve every sector on this chart. But nature will help us by locking some of the carbon up. And this gives us the concept of sources, all the ways that greenhouse gases are produced, as seen on this chart, and sinks, all the ways carbon dioxide is locked out of the atmosphere. Next, please. This image from space of our region shows a couple of important places carbon is stored: in the oceans and in the forests. Carbon is also stored in soil and wetlands, in wood used for construction, and in biochar in soil. Next slide, please. Trees lock up carbon for decades or centuries. If we turn now to what we can do to reduce sources and expand sinks, we need to protect all our native forests. We need to be kaitiaki for the House of Tane, the guardian of forests. Plant as much more as we can. Beside the Billion Trees program, the just released proposed legislation on fresh water will result in much more afforestation. And it'll depend heavily on local councils to implement it, which brings it into our scope. We need to switch to regenerative farming to conserve and build soil carbon, and to incorporate biochar in soil when suitable. Already, forestry pulls our emissions down by 30% a year. And recent research by Forest and Bird suggested that if we can eliminate deer, goats, and possums, that could result in forests sequestering nearly 1/3 more of our annual emissions, which is huge. Next slide, please. So this gives us the concept of gross and net emissions. The blue line at the top here is gross emissions. And you can see at 2018 that it has reached 79 million tonnes a year. Now, if you subtract about 30% of this to store in trees, you get the much lower green line, which is net emissions. So working with nature helps us a lot. What else can we do? Next slide, please. One tool the government uses to bring carbon emissions down is the emissions trading scheme. And this applies only at this time to the red side of the pie chart, that is largely the energy carbon dioxide side, not to agriculture. So here's how it works. The government will set an upper limit on how much carbon dioxide can be emitted every year, and that's the cap. You have to pay to emit carbon dioxide. Now, you will be paid if you sequester carbon dioxide. The cap will come down year by year, and the price will go up year by year. And the starting price is about $35 a tonne. That price will need to be much higher to make people actually use less. It'll need to be more like $100 a tonne. And at that level, it'll cost well-off households about $12 a week extra, and poor households about $6 a week extra to live as we currently do. But this won't be enough either, far from it. What else can we do? Next slide, please. Some people want to put action off to the future in the hope that technology will save us. You certainly hear this when you talk to people about it. But we already know a myriad ways of acting. This book, edited by Paul Hawken, lists the 100 best ideas with data to show how many thousands or millions of tonnes they can avoid or sequester. It uses 3 categories of action which correspond quite closely to 2 of our 3 Climate Forum goals. Firstly, reduce greenhouse gases at their sources, bring emissions to 0. Secondly, support the sinks for greenhouse gases, that is where they can be sequestered. And thirdly, improve society, fostering equality for all. Next slide, please. Some of the most promising ideas, the best of the best from Drawdown, I've extracted for this slide in terms of the quantity of millions of tonnes of emissions avoided or sequestered. And there are hundreds of others, but these are just worth glancing at to confirm the fact that we know how to do this. Next slide, please. So we need to measure our regional emissions. Nelson City Council has measured their council-only emissions, and Tasman District Council is in the process of measuring theirs. We need to know the total regional emissions. Then we need targets, nationally and regionally. Net zero by 2050 is too far away. We need a 2030 target. For example, a 50% reduction by 2030 or better still, a 2025 target. And at the global and national levels, there are carbon budgets, sometimes spanning 5 years. That's how much you can allow yourself to emit in that period. In New Zealand, the Climate Change Commission will set that budget. We already have one as the budget for 2021 to 25, and it's 354 million tonnes, which is on average 71 million tonnes a year, well down from 79. Next slide, please. So there's a lot to do. Isn't that a huge burden? How can we do it? But look at what we did with COVID. We changed our lives substantially in days. Next slide, please. We learned to conduct important meetings in different ways, especially in the Climate Forum. Next slide, please. We curbed our consumption of stuff. We left our cars in the garages and walked and cycled more in our neighbourhoods. We planted veggie gardens. We cooked food at home. Next slide, please. And nature rewarded us. We can do this. Thank you, and thanks to the others in the science group, especially Anne, who helped with this presentation.
Kia ora, Joanna. Thank you so much for that presentation. We've got some comments in the chat. Beautifully said, so clear and useful. Thank you. This has been recorded and will be available for people who are not able to be here today to have a look at as well. And I hope that as in the energy descent presentation last week, there will be some follow-up resources to share from this presentation. We do have some time for some questions and answers for Joanna and the rest of the STAR team. So please pop them in the chat if you would like to ask anything, and I'll kick off if that's all right, because you mentioned at the very beginning that water vapour was up there as a key means of warming the planet, you know what I mean. And I just wonder where there is an interaction, presumably as the planet warms up, the air gets warmer, the air gets warmer, but also gets more moist. So there's a feedback loop involved in water vapor. And I'm wondering what the potential is to slow that down by bringing water back into the soil where it's been lost, back into vegetation where it's been lost. Have you guys been looking at that at all?
I might turn to the other members of the STAR group, Julie, for that. Water vapor, this much I know, that water vapor is a really complicated issue. And in fact, some material has just emerged yesterday foreshadowing a recent multi-model study showing that one aspect of atmospheric water vapor, it looks as if it's much more climate sensitive than it previously was thought to be, which is all the worse for us. But let me just check whether other members of the STAR group can answer the question about whether increasing soil moisture will reduce the global warming potential of atmospheric water vapor.
Well, I mean, I do know that biochar in soil allows the soil to hold more moisture. What I don't know is how long it holds it or whether it will release it as well, and what those conditions are. I do know, though, that water vapor has a greater warming potential than carbon dioxide, but I don't know how much, if anyone does, to clarify that for us. Interesting.
Well, water vapor has got a much greater potential than CO2, but it's got a very short half-life in the order of days. So if you have a look at the carbon dioxide equivalents, it's not particularly high.
Kia ora, thanks for that. I'm sorry to throw you in on a very complex question, and I can see why you chose not to talk about it today. Does anyone else have any questions that they'd like to ask of this team before we invite our next speakers? Tord.
Yeah, just on the water vapor, of course, the increase around the world is associated with the temperature of the oceans. And the oceans cover 2/3 of the area of the planet. So to try to absorb all that extra water vapor that comes off the oceans by somehow absorbing it into the soil, from my point of view, seems totally impossible. So the solution is, of course, to make sure that the temperature of the planet doesn't go up and the temperature of the oceans don't go up. And by the way, the increasing water vapor levels in the air is another additional health risk, which Bruno Lemke and I and another couple of people here in Nelson Tasman region have been doing research on for the last 10 years. So it's a very important part of the whole panorama, and unfortunately a lot of the climate modeling programs do not actually try to model the water vapor level, so it's much less understood how it's going to affect the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Tord. There's a comment in the chat saying a kilo of humus in the soil will hold 4 kilos of water. Thanks, Callie, for that. One question here from Julie asking, can we hear more about biochar, please?
I could say, but someone else might know more. I'll start, unless you see any other hands, Julie, indicating more knowledgeable folk. Biochar is the product of anaerobic burning of biological matter, and it has the properties, one that Jack just suggested, holding moisture if it's mixed with soil, increasing fertility, and of course what's of greatest interest to us in this context is sequestering carbon for decades or even possibly centuries. Its potential for New Zealand is the subject of much study, and there are chairs at a couple of our universities where people are studying this. New Zealand soils are fairly high in carbon, and the potential for the use of biochar here, I think, is not yet clear. But at a global level, it would seem to have great potential as a way of bringing atmospheric carbon down if it were used at a large scale level. I'll leave it at that in the hope that there might be some biochar experts who want to contribute to this.
I can't contribute, but it's page 64 of the drawdown book.
Really helpful.
Like just a little summary that's quite useful.
Great.
Thank you, and thank you again to Joanna and the rest of the science, technology and research team for bringing all this knowledge together so clearly and concisely for everybody here. Appreciate it. Over to Bruce for the next part of this Hui. He can tell us all about it.
Yeah, I'm speaking on behalf of the Economy and Business subgroup, and so a quick introduction to business in about 1 minute. So some people might think that business isn't very relevant to them, and I just want to say it's very significant to us all, either as employers, suppliers of things like food, beverages, shelter, etc., and services, and they're also our neighbours and maybe our customers, fellow residents, etc. So significant to us all. Some people think that business are the problem. Since 1988, we've seen that 70% of all of the world's greenhouse gas emissions have been produced by 100 companies, and that was reported in the Guardian, easy to find. And closer to home, I'm sitting in Mafua here. Just down the road was a company, Fruit Growers Chemical Company, which operated for a number of decades and created New Zealand's most toxic site, which everyone here helped to pay for to fix up when the company abandoned it. Some businesses, though, are determined to be part of the solution, and these include a local group, Businesses for Climate Action. It's a new group, and it's setting some big goals for itself. I've referred to it here on the forum before. It started independently, so it's not specifically part of the forum. It's not actually a subgroup, but it's a perfect fit. And it's doing some good stuff aimed at cutting emissions in the area and creating some more sustainable businesses for the region. A strong focus on action. So for anyone who doesn't already know them, I'm delighted to introduce several of their members, Claire Keeling, Florence Van Dyke and her sister Chloe, and I also see Ellie Young here, who's also involved with that, and I am recently too, though I can't take any credit because that's only over a week ago, and they've done lots of stuff before then. I think Claire is going to kick off there, so
right, bear with me while I share my screen, everyone. Hopefully it all goes well. Okay. And can you just tell me, have you got my slide up now and not my notes?
Right, Claire?
Yep, Thank you. All right. Alrighty. Yeah, thanks so much for having us here today, and thanks, Bruce, for the introduction. I'll have to say that last presentation is actually quite a hard act to follow. I really enjoyed that, and might be contacting Anne to do a bit of a intro or join our presentation at some point, because I thought you touched on some of the kind of core principles and basics there in a way that I just thought that was really concise and approachable. So well done. So yeah, we've already had our introduction essentially, but just a brief mention to the founding members of the group. Katrina couldn't be here today. She represents SBN, but is also a business coach. And we've got Johnny O'Donnell there from Shift On, and you will be hearing from Chloe and Flossie later on. But yes, as Bruce also alluded to, our coordinating group is slowly growing, which is really exciting. So in terms of what I'm going to discuss today, basically just give you a bit of an overview of the why our group formed and our vision. And then I'll be going into the how of how we hope to achieve our goals. So that refers to the activators and the matrix. And from there, I'll do a brief introduction into carbon footprint measurement from Ekos's perspective. And then the chair sisters will come in and give their perspective on what it's been like to go zero carbon for their business. So without further ado, so the why. Yeah, because we believe that a resilient, sustainable community is one that has a low carbon footprint. And as Bruce also alluded to, businesses have one of the biggest opportunities to make a difference here, because they also are, have a lot of responsibility for the emissions that are going into our atmosphere. And our response will be more powerful if we do it together. So, you know, this is really our opportunity. Well, COVID has in some ways given us this unfortunate, but potentially fortunate if we do this in the right way, opportunity to slow down and think about what we do next in our approach to business. So in the same way that climate change is a huge problem, it also has an opportunity for us to reinvent the way we do things in this world. And already I think many of us here today would recognize that a business as usual approach has been doing a lot of damage, not only to our environment, but also our societies and the inequities that have come from that. So we would like to acknowledge the Tauhu Intergenerational strategy that was drafted at the end of last year. All of our groups, participated in that. And the key takeaway from those sessions that we participated in was that the business community is concerned about climate change, and they actually are ready to start taking action, and they want to make a difference. So yeah, we want to acknowledge the Tauhu Intergenerational strategy and their core themes that are up there on the screen. I won't read them out because I'm sure you can read them, but also of course the Climate Forum, you guys, because you know, we see ourselves as a bottom-up business-led group, and our goals feed perfectly into the forum's community goals. And so we're very happy to have brought Bruce into our fold, just so that he can remain a linkage between what our group is doing and achieving and your forum. So the opportunity that we see for Te Tauihu and our region is that businesses are building a low carbon and resilient future for businesses in the Te Tauihu region. And so as part of that, we've set a short-term goal of 1,000 businesses to have measured their carbon footprint by the beginning of 2021. So there was some really excellent information in that previous presentation about why it is so important to understand where our emissions are coming from. But essentially, rather than looking at this from a regional perspective, if we're looking at this from a more business perspective, this is the opportunity for businesses to take a look inwards, understand where their footprint, where their carbon emissions are coming from, and then to innovate and to put strategic decisions in place to start reducing their emissions. Yeah, so once we know our emissions, we can actually start actively reducing them. So the knowledge is key, and I will touch on that in a little bit on my carbon footprint section. But the other part of this is that once we identify the areas that need work, we can actually work together in terms of reducing. We can work together as a business community to overcome those more significant challenges, because reducing emissions can be easy in some sections, but not so easy in others. So that brings me to the how, which is the activators and the matrix. So kind of key to our group's success will be these activators. Essentially, we know businesses want to help the business community. Businesses have knowledge and experience to share, and we know that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. So in order to enable and accelerate action, we've kind of come up with this matrix idea. So again, where businesses have knowledge or experience to share on a particular activity, and this is, I'm specifically talking about reducing carbon and being more efficient in these areas. That's where the rows in this matrix are represented. And then we have along the top there, we have the sectors. And here we have an opportunity for people to stand up and say that they want to influence or coordinate their sector, kind of galvanizing action to start measuring the footprints, reducing footprints, that kind of thing. So since we launched, which was probably about a month ago now, we've actually had some really good outcomes. So Fonterra have already put their hand up for holding an industrial energy demand presentation. So they'll be working with some of our larger businesses in the area about how to reduce emissions for industrial processes, but they'll also be offering that to SMEs. And then we also have next Tuesday, our very first workshop get together, which is going to be hosted by NALMAC, who put their hands up saying that they want to host a workshop on how we can improve fleet management. So that's not only going to be looking at how fleets can be more efficient and managed efficiently, but actually looking at what kind of car share schemes might be able to come into the Nelson area, what kind of demand and needs there are for that. And so this is really about, like, as I hope I've come across here, businesses leading businesses into doing things differently in our region. So it is exciting, and it has a lot of potential, and this is really the mitigation part of how we do things differently in our region. So I'm just going to now touch on carbon footprint measurement, and this is going to be from Ekos's perspective. I potentially didn't introduce that I am from Ekos, but I have my little sign in the background, so you might have picked that up. Yeah, so I will just start with a slide. I put this up here. Usually this is a more interactive, I'm presenting it in person, but this is a snapshot of Nelson City Council's emissions. And so I feel free to write in the chat if you want to be a bit interactive, but I'd invite you to guess what that top line represents in terms of carbon emitting activity for the Nelson City Council. And I will come back to this as a way of illustrating my point soon. So as I started explaining before, when it comes to carbon footprint measurement for businesses, it really is the most essential first step for any business to start reducing their emissions. And going back to the kind of classic quote of "you can't manage what you don't measure," this is especially true for carbon emissions because it's something we cannot see with our eyes. So the process helps us to identify our business as usual operations. And then from there, we can analyze what the future risks are going to be. set targets for reduction, make strategic decisions about how we will do things differently and what investments we might make in the future to reduce our carbon emissions in the future. And so this is leading to innovation. And of course, when you start looking at carbon emissions and reducing, and with the goal of reducing them, you start benefiting from efficiency gains. And from that, you also often benefit from cost savings, which is a good thing for business. So we can also look at this like it's a smart way of doing business. And of course, when we're talking about a smart way of doing business, this is one platform from which a business can start telling their sustainability journey story. And as consumers, many in this, I guess in this forum today, we will all be, when we do consume, we will be thinking about who we consume with. And so again, businesses are starting to wake up to the fact that we care about this stuff, and this is what they have to care about as well. So I've got a bunch of providers, carbon footprint measurers up there. So Ekos and Tauhu are kind of like the main ones providing accreditation and certifications at the moment. But you also have ThinkStep, who focus on life cycle analysis and other in-depth analysis for carbon emissions. Live Lightly are a bit more of a lifestyle calculator, and Future Fit kind of straddles both lifestyle and some business emission reduction programs. But also, there's a very good information booklet on the MFE website, which can give you all the information you need to know about measuring your business emissions to the ISO standard. It's not the easiest of all reading, but it's also not rocket science. So for anyone who has the time to sit down with that, you can actually do this process yourself as well. So from the Ekos perspective, this is how we measure a business carbon footprint. You can see the activities on the left-hand side there, and essentially in terms of the process, all the business needs to do is come onto our website, download our free calculator. They then select a 12-month period that they're going to measure retrospectively, so calendar year or financial year being the most common. And then they will identify those activities on the left that are relevant to their business operations and their business boundary. And so the scope call with a carbon analyst will help them identify that and where they have to measure up until it is no longer their boundary and is somebody else's. And then it's just a matter of people sitting down with the data that they have, which I will mention, I'm sure the chair sisters will touch on this, is in the most part really easy information to gather. So I haven't gone into all the details of what that involves today, purely because I don't want to bore you, given that many people here won't be actually businesses, but I'm really happy to answer any questions that come up later on about what's involved. And then lastly, you've got step 5 there, which is to choose whether to offset. So I will come back to that in a few moments. So you've measured your footprint, you've sent us the data, we're crunching it, and then as an output for that, you get a carbon footprint report. And so what that's giving you is it's organizing all of your data, your emissions by scope and activity. It's showing you where your emission hotspots are, so your emissions profile. And then with this information, that's where you're able to strategically reduce emissions. So this is really key because it is also helping people to identify, what is the easiest thing to tackle first. Easiest, but also most effective, I should probably say. So, it could be the case that a business is investing a whole lot of money on reducing their waste emissions, where actually if they just implemented a policy of only necessary flying or no flying at all, you can see how many emissions they can actually reduce there. So coming back to my little example, I don't know if anyone guessed or if anyone's been chucking things up in the chat because I can't see anything. So I'll just spoil it. Here we are. So it was the waste sent to landfill. So that is interesting because I was aware of there being a group that was going to start, quite heavily campaigning the council on transitioning their vehicles away from the petrol and diesel and towards electrifying the fleet. And although that's not a bad thing to do, and of course the council has a responsibility to be a leader in these spaces and set an example, you can see where the council actually needs to invest its energy in terms of reducing its emissions. So this is just one example of how important this process is for actually understanding how to strategically reduce. I'm almost done, but before I do, I just wanted to finish up on the offsetting side of Ekos. So as some of you may know, we're not only carbon footprint measurement specialists, but we actually also develop carbon forest projects, and we have our own supply chain of projects that we kind of recruit into our supply chain. So this kind of side of what we do is actually kind of the core of why we exist. We're actually kind of rainforest activists, climate change activists, more than carbon analyst geeks. So this is our theory of change, and it's a systems-based approach to implementing SDGs, but to really creating significant changes in land use. So we help landowning communities transition from traditional land use practices, which may be clear felling forests to earn money and revenue, to sustainable land management, which could be protecting a permanent carbon forest project, so a piece of regenerating bush on their land. So that's kind of an adaptation part. It's also can lean towards a just transition pathway, So by protecting and growing restorative indigenous forests, of course, this is part of the drawdown of carbon, we specialise both in protection forests, but also regeneration forests. And in doing all this, it's really about building the ecological resilience in Aotearoa in the Pacific. So this is really key to what we're doing. It's all about the biodiversity co-benefits and the community co-benefits that are occurring during the creation of these forest projects. In the meantime, we're accelerating the business transition to a low carbon economy by making this carbon footprint process accessible to SMEs. So, as I pointed out earlier, once a business has measured their footprint, that's when they get the opportunity to decide whether they want to offset 100% of their business emissions, or they can actually offset 120% of their emissions. So drawing down more carbon than they've measured they have emitted. Now, this map kind of shows you where Ekos is currently working in terms of our supply chain. The green dots are where we are currently issuing credits, and the orange dots are where projects are in development. So you can see we've got a really exciting supply chain evolving here, and it will just be increasing. It's such an important part of what we do, and it's why, as well as working in the Businesses for Climate Action Group, which is really focusing on the reduction, we really see a massive role for the offsetting part, because this is a business's chance after doing the measuring and reduction process to actually be channeling private finance into building resilience in Aotearoa in the Pacific. And we're going to need all the investment we can get in building up our ecological resources as the worst impacts of climate change start to take hold. So that's about it from me, I think. I'll be able to answer some questions at the end. Thanks for listening to me, and I'll hand over to the girls now.
Thanks, Claire. I'm just sharing my screen now. Is that working? Someone could just tell us if the screen's up.
No, it's not sharing.
Not yet.
While they're sorting that out, thank you very much to the people who've put some questions into the chat. We'll get Claire back up to look at some of those shortly.
Claire, would you just be able to share your screen for us?
Yes, I can, but do I have your slides on my presentation? I'll go into your Google Slides, so just one moment.
Thank you.
Sorry, everyone.
Just click on, oh, it's not working.
Okay.
I could just do it.
Okay. Just see how I can, let's do that.
While you're sorting that out, we'll just start without the slides.
Yeah.
Kia ora everyone, my name's Florence and this is Chloe. We're from Chia Sisters and thank you so much for letting us speak at the forum. We had a fantastic time there earlier in the year and yeah, really enjoyed what you were saying, Joanna, about taking action and you know the solutions are right there in front of us already. So we've always been really interested in sustainability and business and climate change in particular. And about 2 years ago, we realized, you know, this is a really big focus for us. And we knew that businesses were the biggest emitters of climate change, but we realized that we actually had no idea how many emissions our business was emitting. And we really wanted to do something about that.
Can you see my slides now?
Yes. If you could just move to the next one, that would be great.
Cool, just tell me when. Yeah.
Thank you. So we are certainly not experts in this. This is the beginning of our journey, but we still feel that there's value to share, but just to be aware, we're still learning as well. So we went through the process of measuring our carbon footprint, and that allowed us, as Claire said, to identify the problem we were trying to solve. It is so crucial to understand that before you start. Then we went through the process of reduction, and I just want to comment here how important reduction is and that should always be the first step before offsetting. Once we'd gone through that process of reduction, and we're still going through that process, we offset, and we did that through the Rāmika, through sustainable native forests by 120%. And then the future, which is, I think, the most important part, is building that into the way we make decisions so that going forward, we always have the environment at the table. We're always making decisions that think about the future. Next slide. So this is a quick snapshot of our carbon footprint. You can see everything that we measured, and you can also see where our pain points are. So you can see that the areas that we need to focus on: fuels, electricity, waste, freight, and flights. So once we'd measured our carbon emissions, we went about reducing them, and we did that in a whole lot of ways, but by measuring we could really focus on those sore points. So we installed solar panels on our juicery. We've got 32 solar panels there, and they have the ability to harness 16,000 watts of energy per hour. We also stopped air freighting any of our product. So we were just doing that in small quantities, but we could quickly see from the carbon calculations that air freight, particularly internationally, was having a huge impact on our carbon footprint. So we've made a rule now, we just only freight by truck and by sea, which has had a really big impact for us. And when it was time to buy a new company car, we made that an electric vehicle. So step 3 was that we offset the remaining emissions in the Rāmika carbon sink. That's a project that Ekos is working towards, and we did that by 120%, which enabled us to get that climate positive certification with Ekos. You can see on the map there, the green ones are the ones that are active with Ekos, and the orange ones are ones that they're still working on, which is really cool. And
And the fourth part is working with others in the region. So as Bruce was talking about, we've got a really great driving group now, and we are working together to form a group, Businesses for Climate Action, so that our impact can be bigger than just ourselves. We know, us alone can only have a small impact, but together we can make some really big change in this region.
Was that slide? Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. So I'm part of the Businesses for Climate Action group, as Claire showed on the matrix, is identifying where our pain points are, identifying where those problems are, and then working on group solutions. And so I've just put a couple of our pain points up here. For example, pallet wrap. This is something that the consumer never gets to see. It's pretty much every product is put on a pallet to be transported, and it's wrapped in plastic, which is then removed and chucked out. And that's horrendous, and it's a lot of plastic and it's a lot of waste. And so we're currently in the process of having a cover that goes over the pallet that can be reused over and over again. And that's currently being made for us, and that's something we'll be able to share with other members of the business community. One of the other things that that's a bit of a pain point that's just come up for us is that we have just launched this fresh homemade muesli that we deliver to people's doors, and we're sending those out in courier packs. They're compostable courier packs, but they're designed to be reused. And currently there's no mechanism whereby courier packs can get returned for reuse. And so we've just launched this a couple of weeks ago, but I'm pretty determined to find a way whereby we can get those courier packs back and reuse them for their full life cycle, and then they can get turned into compost. And I think that would be a great thing to start in the Nelson region for all businesses. And then there's fleet management, which is a huge problem for a lot of businesses. That's not one of the projects that we're leading within the Business for Climate Action group, but it's one that is being led by another member. And so that will again, hopefully provide ways of doing things that the whole business community can benefit from. And there's a lot more pain points out there, and we're keen to identify as many as possible and hope that we can make a real difference through reduction in that way. So our one of our other big goals is to have 1,000 businesses in Nelson measuring their carbon footprint before or at the beginning of 2021, as Claire talked about earlier. And I guess this is just focusing on that measuring point that we believe is particularly important, because until you've measured your carbon emissions, you can't really see where that low-hanging fruit is. So on our last slide, we've just got a couple of asks from you. We feel that our group really does align with the Climate Forum. And if anyone here works for a business that would like to measure its carbon emissions, or has links to business groups that we can present to and go through the process of how we became zero carbon, or if you have any solutions like the returnable satchels idea, we would love to hear them and work with you. I think there are a few questions in the chat, so perhaps Julie, if there's time, we could just quickly talk through those before going on to the next piece on the agenda.
Yeah, we've got a couple of minutes, so let's just do a quick fire around on some of these questions that came out. And thank you so much for those presentations and for being here. It is fantastic to see what's going on in the business community. One of my questions would be about how other organisations that we're part of can be part of it. I'm assuming that the process would be much the same, so if I'm mistaken, I'd be interested to hear that. So questions from someone else though, which is far more important. So one from Lindsay, the carbon footprint of data wasn't in the matrix list that Claire showed us, although it's globally now a greater emitter than all aviation. Can you please comment on if and how this might be included in the future?
Yes, okay. I was just trying to put my mind into the mind of Lindsay then. So I think he's talking about online data and online storage and that kind of thing. I think you're right, Lindsay. Right now, carbon footprint measurement is like, you know, it's really in its infancy in terms of what, you know, is currently required to be measured, say, by the ISO standard. And the standard is actually continuously evolving, and I have no doubt that data usage will eventually be part of what a business is required to measure as part of their footprint. It's really important because obviously we need to be measuring in order to manage kind of part of it, isn't it? So if we're not asking those tough questions, no change will come, and people won't be considering how they could do things differently. So I definitely think there's obviously some voluntary initiatives that are out there and information, and you can do that yourself as well and source that information. It's not official yet, but I'm sure it will be in scope soon enough, along with a lot of other things. And I will just add on, in terms of that matrix, I didn't say that today, that is absolutely not an exhaustive list. That was just an example. So in terms of those rows, you can basically add as many rows as you like to that, whatever the area or business activity is that a business is participating in. If that has a carbon impact, which it likely does because almost everything does anyway, then it can feature if a business wants to activate on that. And of course, same with the sectors. I only had 3 example sectors up there, but we want the whole region involved.
Sure, thanks for that, Claire. And a question for Florence and Chloe, if that's okay. A couple of people in the chat have asked, while acknowledging it's fantastic that you're looking at how you produce things and reducing the emissions of how you're producing things, is the business community thinking about how much we should be producing and consuming to question the idea of growth, I guess? Is that on your agenda at all?
I think that's a really important question, and I think it's something that I'm thinking of as an individual and as a person, and part of the way that we do business is trying to bring in what we feel as people into our business, and so that most certainly should be a part of the equation. And it's such a big question, and I think I think that we certainly need to be talking more about it. The group is still in its infancy; it's only a few months old at the moment, so I think we'll bring that to the agenda, and if anyone can add anything that they around how we frame that discussion, we'll certainly bring it to the group and try and feed back to you on that.
I think also more broadly in New Zealand, this isn't something that our group has focused on, but we do recognise that New Zealand has something to add in high quality products. You know, we're never going to win or be encouraging fast fashion, but we do have really good high quality clothing brands that you don't need to replace every single year or every single season. And so I do think that is a space that New Zealand could succeed in, consume less but higher quality and lower carbon, if we put more time and effort into it and educate our consumers on that.
Well, thank you both for that. It's a very difficult question for businesses to even think about, and I applaud you for taking that on as a conversation. It's a huge one to have. There are lots of other questions and comments going on in the chat, which is wonderful. We're out of time to deal with them at the moment, but I wonder if Claire, Chloe and Florence, if I could copy them and email them to you, whether you'd be willing to feed back to the forum via email and via me. That would be amazing. Thank you so much for being here today. No worries. I really appreciate it. So on to the forum agenda that remains, the second hour of this Hui. We're going to carry on thinking about how we take action. It occurs to me that we're having a challenging beginning to this concept of the forum, because it's something that we haven't been involved in before as a country. This is the first forum of its kind in this country, having a collective of people from a community coming together and figuring out what we should do about this. Because once we've figured out what we're going to do about it, the question then becomes, well, who does that? And what does it look like? You know, we can take action as a collective. We're just a group of people. We need to own that action. We can take action as small groups, as subgroups, just another smaller collective in a way. And we can take action as individuals working together. But unlike a lot of other forums that we might engage in, such as our council, we're not asking other people to do the work. This is asking ourselves and each other to do the work. So it's a really interesting kind of shift of mindset for me anyway, and I've certainly spoken with a few of you about it. So what can this action look like? Well, it can look like anything we want it to, of course, but some ideas that the people who have been coordinating the subgroups came up with at our recent meeting is the idea of coming together to create climate action plans. And it seems to me that the presentations we've just had are an excellent foundation for that. And I'm sure we can gather some resources and throw together a template, a working group or something to have all of us create our own climate action plans. We can certainly continue to take advantage of council and central government opportunities to engage in their processes. We can outreach across the community to make sure that the conversations and the actions that we're doing are available to as many people as possible throughout our communities, and to ensure that we have a good cross-section of people within our forum so that our decisions are sound from a community perspective. We can engage with key people and organisations working in the same space. We can analyse policy, advocate for policy change and write new policy. We can ensure that key perspectives are represented in our work. We can collect data and share information. We can do training and capacity building. We can develop alternative and more sustainable practices and undertake them ourselves. We can mobilise resources, build relationships and alliances, mobilise and organise. We can oppose negative developments. We can take research and take action as advocates, and we can advocate for improvement across the board. So there's plenty that we can do as a group of individuals, and I'm sure you can think of more to add to that list. The question is, for me, how do we want it to look? What do we want all these actions to have in common? And we've got a number of questions in the agenda, which I'll read to you now. And this is how it's going to work. I'm going to assign you guys randomly to groups of 4 or 5 people. And within your groups, you can pick and choose any 1 or 2 or more of these questions to discuss until 2:30, 20 minutes away. Just a quick chat. So an introduction, a check-in, figure out which question your group is interested in looking at first. And that take you all the way through to 2:30, or you may run out of steam on that one and choose to tackle a second one. So here are the 4 questions, and you may come up with one of your own that seems more important, and that's fine. Question number 1. The purpose of the forum is to weave our communities together around this issue. Now that lockdown is eased, how should the forum embody this purpose? Question number 2, what need do you have that brought you here, and is that need being met? What would bring your absent but interested friends here? Question 3, how should the forum progress over time? What milestones would you like it to reach, and what should its work look like? And finally, how does the post-COVID situation change things for the climate change response? How should the forum respond? So some interesting questions there, and hopefully you'll find one that resonates with everybody in your group. If it does turn out that all the group but you wants to focus on one question, then feel free to rejoin the main room and I'll put you into another group. That's no problem at all. But otherwise, I'm sure you'll find something interesting to explore among that. Underneath the agenda, there's a place for you to put your notes from the breakout room. So either at the end of the chat or as it goes on, feel free to put the main points that you're coming up with as a team into the bottom of the agenda there. Does anyone have any questions of clarification before I set you going in your breakout rooms? Okay, great. So let's see if this works. I've never done this before. 43 people going into 10 rooms. You should get an invitation. Press join room and you'll be away. Have fun.